Welcome. It is our fourth class for the RAVE ABC. And so we're going to continue our journey looking at the different mechanics in the body graph. And today we're going to focus on introducing you to the circuit groups. And so in terms of human design, we have 3 circuit groups, and each of them have a theme. You know, in other words, you're starting to see that there's an aspect of them. It looks like Bamboo's right here. Hi, Bamboo. Welcome. We're just getting started. So the 3 circuit group themes you can see here on the slide. But before we, mention those, think about a circuit as being self-contained to some degree. In other words, a circuit is where there's a movement through that circuit that, is really along a channel track, and it brings it all together. All of the components of the circuit work together. And so it's like having an integrated and seamless life force in motion, and this energy is always flowing from any one point in the circuit towards the next, whatever is the path of the circuit. And so when you look at these circuits, think that they are not complete without and I should say not just complete, but active, unless all of the components are activated. Now, you can have aspects or potentials of the entire circuit be, expressing itself, but for the ultimate theme to be expressed, that's probably a more accurate, precise way to say it, all components would need to also be active. So when you look at the individual circuit here, it says the word empowerment. All of those things that are illustrated as part of individual circuitry is what expresses empowerment. You can't have, missing pieces and have the full expression of what empowerment is. Same with collective circuit sharing and the tribal circuit of support. And so if you look at circuitry, you can see that at any one point, if you've got areas that are open, it's really showing us, first of all of them together as one, because that's really what the body graph is. It's all 3 of them at the same time. Then you see the entire spectrum of the human interaction. And so all of these are important, and all of them offer us a way of interacting as humans. And so each one of them brings something to us that is important. It also tells you that circuitry shows you how you're designed and where you're designed, if it's an open area, for example, to engage with life around you, to be open to what you interact with others around. And so we're going to see that, again, these are the 3 themes, and we're going to look at them today a little bit more, and then even more when we look at the channels that make up those circuits in our next class. So this table will give you, in one slide, kind of a snapshot. We have the major circuit, which is the 3. There's also a few channels that are not part of a circuit. We'll describe those. It's called integration channel. You notice that the plural is in parentheses because it can be one expression of a channel, integration could be, or it could be a combination of channels. But it's not a circuit group. It's not something that's sort of all self-contained and providing a certain kind of movement as it engages and interacts with the world around it. Now, the minor circuits are circuits that they're like sub-circuits within the major circuit. And tribal has 2. One is the ego. We call that more of a major circuit within the major circuit. And then we have defense circuitry. It's a minor circuit. And yet the keynote, obviously, for both is still supporting or support. We've got individual, It's made up of two circuits. One's knowing, the other is centering, and it comes down to the keynote of empowering. And collective is made up of two circuits. They're both considered pretty major circuits within that because they're pretty much activated by the same number of life forces. And it's the understanding circuit. Logic is another word for it. And the sensing circuit, where abstract is another word for it. Both of those are keynoted with the word sharing. And integration, which if we have time at the end of today, I'm going to also include. Integration is not a circuit group, so there's not going to therefore be minor circuits within it. And the keynote, it looks similar to individual. It actually flows along some of the same areas of the body graph, but it is self-empowering. It's not how you're integrating necessarily in the same kind of way with the world around you that individual is. So we'll talk about that when we talk about integration. So we'll focus today first on the major circuit groups. And as we begin, I'm going to begin with individual circuit, the one that's all about empowerment. Now, one of the first things to do when you're starting to kind of learn the mechanics of the body graph and of the system is to get familiar with where it lies. Where, when you look at a life force channel and you want to know what circuit group it's in, it's a pattern that you want to start kind of taking in, and maybe at first you have to kind of memorize it. And so when you look at it, let's see if I can get some animation to work for me today. So when you look at it, the individual circuitry is basically the one that goes right down the middle. And one way you could remember that is to say it's like it's the inside track. See how that ultimately is sort of what you're looking at here. This one's a little bit of it's sort of still on the inside track for the ego center anyway. And so this inside track is being surrounded by other circuitry. In this case, really, it's the collective circuitry. You could say the collective sort of, is containing. It's kind of like making sure that individual doesn't get away. So contained by the collective, but also very vulnerable to whether or not the individual circuitry is going to receive any kind of support from the tribe or not. That might be a way for you to remember where it's located. So the individual circuitry, I'm going to get rid of this drawing now. The individual circuit group, when you look at what it activates within the body graph, every single one of the 9 centers is activated. That means that there is an expression of every single one of the biological centers that is reflecting an empowerment kind of frequency. Now, it also says, there's a lot going on in this circuitry. It is actually one of the most complex. Anytime you hear me say most complex, it's because it has so many different components to it or variations to it. In other words, there's much more gates associated with this individual circuitry than maybe, tribal circuitry, for example. And so anytime you have a lot of mixtures of gates, you have lots of different ways that expression is going to come out. And so this circuit has the most variations. It's got the largest number of channels, gates, and varieties of even awareness that can be expressed. Now, if you were to meet someone, I don't think it's possible, but if you were to meet someone who had this entire body graph as their design, then it would be, an individual who would obviously express the full potential for empowerment. But what would their type be? If we go back to just the basics of your aura type and your configuration that creates that, What is this type out of the different 4 types? Yes, it is bamboo. And Richard and and Pam and Grace, thank you. It is a manifesting generator, but it's a manifesting generator that has what kind of authority? Yes, Ming, manifesting generator. What kind of authority? Emotional. So you could say that this is an emotional manifesting generator. So if you were to act in a way that is correct and in how you interact with the world around you as an emotional manifesting generator and that expresses empowerment, you would basically have to wait for life to bring things you can respond to, and then wait in that response, wait for clarity to decide where to place your expressed energy once you've reached clarity. And this particular type, being a manifesting generator, is also conditioned to be looking for ways to skip steps as you're building and mastering. You're looking for efficiency in the use of the energy. So this is also sort of an insight into what the true empowerment is. It's really for yourself and others to be able to respond correctly to what life brings, what you attract basically through your sacral life force. And then as you move through this response, you've got multiple responses over time that will bring a level of clarity to the true aspects of your expression of empowerment. So empowerment isn't something that happens, boom, right here, right now, and it's gone. It's something that is an integration of a lot of different things as you've been waiting for life. It's not something you initiate. It's something you respond to. And so you look at the keynotes, go back to my mouse. And these are, wonderful words that express the formula behind, many formulas that are really kind of component expressions of individual circuitry. So obviously the word empowerment itself would be on the list, but so would individuality. And that refers to something that's brand new or something that's unique. Now, there's also frequency, patterns in circuitry. And that comes from a pattern that gets established between the root center and the sacral center. It's the fuel of that comes from pressure, the body's pressure, that's also got a frequency mixed with life force, a generative kind of field. And it sets the generative life force pattern, you call it format, within the entire circuitry. If you've got a channel that is going from the root center to the sacral, there's only 3 channels that do that, but one of them is in the individual circuitry. And so that format sets the kind of frequency that goes through the entire circuit. It doesn't matter if it's way up at the top in the head or if it's coming out of the G center, it's still going to have this format, this pattern, this frequency. And it's called the pulse. It's a format that creates the potential for mutation, something, again, that's brand new and unique. So there's a time element associated with this circuitry too, and it's the now. So anything that is in this circuit, even if it's in the solar plexus, operates through a format of the pulse. And if it's in the solar plexus, that's going to set the pattern of the wave. And it's going to basically be a pulsing that's either now or not now. It's, that kind of combination. There's also a sense, if you think about our senses as humans, and the sense that is in sort of resonant vibration with this individual circuit is acoustical. It's hearing oriented. That's why when I meet people or I see their design and it's got a lot of individual circuitry, I know that sound is really important to them. And it's an element that they're really sensitive to. I always recommend people with a lot of individual circuitry to kind of, connect with a person and see if you can connect with their voice or, an aspect of that from a sound quality. So you'll know if that's something that you can more easily take in, the information. And then we have emotional wave that again is going to be formatted through a pulse, and that's why there's a spike up or there's a spike down. There's other keynotes and qualities though that you can kind of recognize within this. Obviously what it says is the individuality is what's empowering something brand new and unique into the world. If we did not have individual circuitry, there would be no change. The individual process though can't be complete without somewhat of a seamless interaction through the entire circuitry. So each connecting channel can't really be omitted from an individual process. You may not contribute to the entire circuitry, but you may contribute parts of it if you've got individual life forces. And so you empower as, just an expression of being in life with the other frequencies of individuality. You do so without really wanting to. It's not like you're planning it. You've got a goal, you're going to do that in your mind. Individuals living their design just simply empower. That's what happens. So those that are living not self are sort of stripping people away from power. It's like you're either empowering or disempowering. So other keynotes that would come from this would come from, some of the specific circuits within individuality, things like I know or I don't know, obviously points to a knowing circuit. So but it says something. If you don't know something, you just simply don't know in the now. It doesn't mean in the next moment, the next now, you wouldn't know. It's like that's where those insights come from. Some of you, posting comments about the homework. It was basically something that can offer empowerment because it was suddenly an insight that came out of nowhere. It's like, oh my gosh, now I know. Now I know what all of this, at a different level, I know now. And that's kind of what goes on here. Now there's a chemistry. You may not have thought about that, but this circuit as a life force is bringing a chemically activated quality to a person's life too. And this melancholy word that you may kind of associate with sadness, or there's all kinds of words that can go with it, is simply a frequency. And it's a chemistry that comes from individual circuitries. So that's really all it is. It's a frequency that creates a certain mood, this melancholic mood. Now, its purpose, if you want to give it a purpose, is creative expression. And so if in that moment there is no potential for creative expression, it can kind of flip into a feeling of sadness. It's again, it's nothing more than, it's not as if there's something to worry about here. It's just having this potential to empower the new, and it's either there or it's not there. So mutations, I remember many years ago, I used to just use the word all the time, and someone said, what the heck does that mean? What is mutation? Well, individuality is mutative. The activation sparking the new or the unique. If you think about nature, we talk about a mutant, something that a species that's a mutation. Well, it's something, a variation that just kind of came out of nowhere, like the frog that has 5 legs instead of 4 or something like that, and it's a mutation in form. It's something brand new and unique. And so it exists, and mutation's always sort of there. as this latent potential. It's sort of possible at all times, but not, but it doesn't always happen. So it keeps mutation available. It keeps the possibility of something new coming in. And if you have mutation, and you obviously therefore have the potential for melancholy, sometimes, again, there's a way that frequency can kind of spiral down, not from just sadness, but maybe to depression. It's another thing that comes out of format energy, the potential for depression. Now, that doesn't mean that's always going to happen. It's a potential. That's all. Just like mutation's a potential. And so it is a potential amongst individuals who are kind of, again, remember what this circuitry is doing. It's waiting for the next unpredictable mutative event. And mutation is a driving force of our evolution. It is what keeps us, in the moment with more possibilities of survival, because, no matter what happens around us with mutation, mutation's always there. So if it's mutating, then if you don't have something that mutates as well, then how do you adapt to stuff that's changing all the time? So if it's not fed, and that word is kind of an interesting term, but if it's not, let's say, given more energy by the collective, offering it more of a future than just the now by the collective, then it's not got anywhere to go. It won't really reach a level of transcendence from beyond just individual and potential for empowerment. So some of you with individual circuitry might feel like an outsider sometimes, and yet you're being contained by the collective, and being kind of kept in control by the collective. And so I say we because I have individual circuitry, we that bring the new can and are obviously outsiders from that perspective. We're not going to fit the norm if it's new. And so what's interesting about that is there's it begs a requirement that we remain within that state of empowerment, uninfluenced, not told what to do, not, dictated what the new's going to be, but to be able to integrate with others only in the now, only when it's right, and only when it's okay for that to be taken in and shared. Otherwise, it's not there to want to be interfered with. That's why sometimes when you engage in conversations with others, and the other that you're trying to explain everything to, I was kind of in reference to the 4323 forum comment, whether you're trying to explain something or you're trying to share your opinion about something and facts, not in the moment can someone really literally hear you. We call that being deaf, not being able to hear, precisely and clearly and in the now, because there's something genetically protecting them against this influence. I used to have a conversation with my, at the time, roommate, and you could tell that I was saying all kinds, I was going blah 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 blah, as we that have all this sharing circuitry in our throats do. And they would nod their head as if they were listening, and yet the next moment they might ask a question that was really clear they were not listening to a word I said, or they would have known already and didn't have to ask. And it's just a reflection of the individual circuitry. This person was not ready to hear until they were ready to hear, until they asked, obviously, and invited me to share. And that's part of it too. So when you think of empowerment, recognize that it's not personal. It's not personal that someone's not able to hear you in that moment. It's not personal that someone brings about something mutatively different and unique. it's just a byproduct of what their potential expression in life can offer as they engage with others around them. So if we didn't have mutation, there would not be any evolution. We wouldn't be as these 9 centers today, because obviously somewhere along the line there was mutations. So let's just see that within this circuitry, you can have all the different types possible that are able to also uniquely express something when it comes to this circuitry. The one in the upper left-hand corner that you see, that chart, that's a generator chart. And so you can actually take elements that we've been discussing, these words, these keynotes, these themes, and mention things that are going to have a formula to them that provides an expression of truth for that chart. So as a generator, she responds to empower others with her unique and individual potential for mutation and melancholy. That happens to be my chart, and I can say that would really resonate with me. That would say, yeah, I got that. I can feel that sometimes. Not every day. It's not, you know, the pulse is not on all the time. It's either there or not there. But it's a potential that can happen, and it can happen at any time. And it's not personal when suddenly I have a response that brings mutation. I also have a projector chart right below mine. It's a projector chart that if you look for the inside track, you'll see that it's kind of hard to see. It's so tiny, but there is a channel that goes from the head to the ajna. There's a channel that goes from the throat to the G center in the inside track. Those are, you know, those are basically elements that are expressing the potential for empowerment. And as a past student of mine who has to follow first and foremost the strategy of a projector is to wait for an invitation. So waiting for an invitation to guide the other, that's really what the projector is here to do, with her empowered knowing when she decides and knows that she can express her creative voice. And so this would be a keynoting, a formula of an expression of what this person's life expression could be. And we have in the upper right-hand corner a manifestor chart. In fact, it's a famous person. I don't think she's alive anymore. But I don't, and I also don't know if you would recognize the name, but I'll mention it. Has anybody here heard of Frida Kahlo? It's F-R-I-D-A-K-A-H-L-O. Frida Kahlo. Grace has. So, and Pam. Yeah, so Frida Kahlo was, I think it's a famous Mexican artist. And in fact, Hollywood actually did a film to kind of depict Frida. She was, you know, quite an interesting character. But she's, now you can see, a manifester. She was actually an emotional manifester, you know, obviously here to have impact. So you could say that Frida impacts others when she's in the mood and informs with her mutative emotional expression by first waiting for clarity about what she knows and feels she can initiate. And so obviously she was allowing us all to be impacted by her own, to some degree, self-expression. She did a lot of her own self-portraits, but highly emotional. In fact, if you read into her history, she was married but had a very, very volatile kind of relationship there. All kinds of things going on in her life. Quite an interesting character. Now, when you look down at the bottom, you'll see a reflector chart. Now, you may think, well, how do you really know a reflector's different qualities of circuitry when they don't have any life forces? Well, it's a good question, But what we know about a reflector is they have 26 activated gates, just like we all do. And those gates are going to be potentials for life force expression, especially over a course of their lunar cycle, because they're going to create the potential for, life forces, inconsistent life forces that are conditioned. And those are going to at least, in those moments express the circuitry. So this was another past student. So if he waits 28 days, 29 days, he can unconsciously, I use the word unconsciously because I'm using a gate that empowers the potential for the new and the unusual. And some of those that were in this body graph are falling in individual circuitry, but they're also on the design side, the unconscious side. So, they would be surprised. Of course, reflectors are designed to be surprised. And when they're plugged into the daily transits, I'm sure that this reflector was going to experience lots of surprises, some of which they would be more identified with if it's black than those that are red. So all of those have a element of mechanical truth to it. It's just being a mechanic here. Now, collective is about sharing, and so that's the main keynote. But as I'll get out my pencil again for this. Oops, I don't know why sometimes well, now I've got a spotlight. I'll just go with what I got. So here we have a flow that is on the outside. That's how you can tell if it's in the collective circuitry. It's always on the outside, especially of the body graph. Even in the inside area, it's on the outside. So that's collective. And it flows along the outside of this body graph, but it still includes some of the centers. Now notice that collective circuitry does not include the tribal circuitry, or rather the ego. The ego is really the heart and soul of the tribe. So when you look at this chart, though, there's no ego. That's sort of significant. When you look at something, it's either defined by something or not defined by something. And so collective, the nature of the collective and of sharing has nothing to do with ego. And the significance you can read into in many, many, many ways. But one of the significances is that what do we think of when it comes to the ego? If you have an open ego, and you remember back to living your design, you may have been told, if it's open, you never want to do what? Anyone have a thought about that? What do you not want to do if you have an open ego and have it be sort of healthy? That might be a leading question, but any idea what I'm kind of going for? Yeah, commitments. You can't keep them. You're not designed to have will to consistently, keep commitments. And it says something kind of interesting about the collective. The collective can share and share and share all day long, but they can't keep any commitments. They can't promise. They're sharing, that's all. They're sharing. They're not promising you something. And yet we take so many people at their word, right? So as a type, let's go down to just looking at it from a type perspective. What is the type? How does this circuitry operate correctly as an expression in the world as it interacts with the others? What is its type? What's its aura configuration? And therefore strategy as well as authority. It is actually using the combination with the authority. It's another emotional manifesting generator. How about that one? So, again, truly the nature of the ultimate and sharing is still waiting for life to bring things it can respond to, then waiting for clarity to decide where to share. It's either experimental expression or experience with others. Once it reaches clarity, it can't just automatically in the now always share everything. if you're really looking at the full potential for sharing, it's going to have somewhat of a reflection on the past too. That's what's going to help bring clarity overall. So they are also, as if it's a person, conditioned to notice what doesn't fit into a pattern. That's really, so when you see what it isn't an individual, and so it's not about, fitting in. Well, actually, the individual is not about fitting in, but the collective is. And so if you are a mind, not self-mind, what are you going to be interested in? You're going to look for what's open. So the collective's very interested in things that don't fit in, that are weird and changed and different. It gets its attention. It's like, oh my God, look at that. And it's also going to notice, this tribal nature that is sort of this pattern, this never changing thing. And it's not about that. It is about bringing about change and progress from the collective sharing. Now, another thing about this is it's not personal. There is nothing about it personal. The personal aspects come more from a tribe. So, just things to note. So if we look at certain keynotes associated with this, yeah, these are going to be some of the elements of the formula. At the broadest sense, because we haven't started looking at it specifically in sub-circuits yet, but just in the broadest of sense, this will take into consideration all sharing, all projecting into the future, all making sense out of the past experience of things. It has two format patterns, and those each belong to channels that come from the root to the sacral. One of those channels creates a patterned format throughout that, it's really kind of a circuit within that circuit that's cyclical in nature. In other words, it goes through cycles. It goes through wave cycles, you could say, beginnings, middles, and ends. And then the other channel is one that sets a pattern of the frequency throughout the circuit that's focused and concentrated. So those are the two patterns that come from collective. So the time is going to be obvious. One is past and one is future. It isn't going to be in now, because the now is really associated with the individual. Now there is a sense associated too, and it's called seeing. It's your visual sense. And so it doesn't matter where it falls within the collective circuitry. That pattern is a visual pattern, a seeing kind of pattern. You see things a certain way within this circuit. And there's an emotional frequency, since we saw the solar plexus defined. This is where you have that kind of wave. You may have been introduced to certain waves. I don't know, but in LYD you might have just been informed that there are certain waves in your emotionality, if you're an emotional being, and one of them is passing through this circuit, and so therefore it's one that rises and crashes. Now I just see a typo now. It's crash is spelled correctly with the crash wave, but not down below. Sorry about that. I don't think I've ever seen that before. See, it's so funny. You can only see it when you see it. And yet the collective is about seeing what could be improved, what can be fixed, what needs to be fixed. And here's my collective mind seeing it now. So yes, this is the collective sharing, projecting out logical patterns into the future and making sense out of the past experience. And the ultimate purpose of that is, again, transcendence, so that we're going beyond the present. So this sine wave, S-I-N-E wave, or crash wave, is one that just rises, and as it's rising, it's sort of rising with this desire, and it discovers, an experience. It is either what you anticipated or not. You know, if it's not, or if it reaches a certain peak, it finally explodes and crashes, and only to rise up again. It's a pattern that is cyclical. And so it's going to keep, you know, it's going to go through its cycle. It's going to go up and then it's going to go down, and it's going to reach a potential. It either matches the expectation it's going for in that rise, or if it doesn't meet that peak potential at that moment, it just crashes. That's the nature of this energy. So this collective circuitry is always what shares, and it also establishes the new. So all an individual can do is just pop out an insight, and it can be quite noticed and quite different. And if the collective says, that's got sort of a potential here, then it could bring it into its collective nature and establish it as part of the pattern. It can take a new, you know, call it gift from the individual, but it's not going to keep it there. It's not going to say, well, let's just keep this exactly the way it is. It wants to always bring things to a different transcendent level of improvement. So it's always trying to make it better. It's always trying to either prove or disprove something that's there through experience or logic. So this kind of circuitry is projecting patterns. That's why you can sort of see where things could go in the future, because you're looking at the kind of the pattern it has, or step by step where things seem to be leading. Well, gee, if you know, and it's logical, of course, it's like a formula. You know, 1 + 1 is going to equal, because you're kind of fitting it into the formula. And so you see if it fits. Does it actually answer that formula in the predictable way or not? And if it doesn't fit the formula, it does not get accepted. It gets no place in the pattern. It gets eliminated. So this is also going to be a pattern, if it's the one going to the past, that requires you to reflect on something, to see where it fits in the pattern. So as you establish a pattern, you take, you know, this individual mutation, you're going to have to test it, you're going to have to experiment with it, you're going to have to experience it and see if it's so, you know, well accepted that it really it kind of transcends just the individual, and it can be collectively shared by many. So it has to pass the test that this can be good and improve the future for many. So it's always going to want more than it needs. You know, that's one of those things about collective. And it shares, but it doesn't want to be shared with. That's sort of something you may not have thought about. It's kind of a one-way street there. It's like, I'm just sharing a bunch of stuff, and I don't necessarily need you to share back. It's one of those kinds of qualities. So it's inherently social. You know, that's what you can expect. It's very interested in humanity as a whole, as a circuit. And the pattern is collective. It, you know, progress itself only happens through patterns. As such, we actually establish a way to transcend patterns within this. So you have to, again, then with everything that has to do with the body graph, go back to how does it operate overall as it integrates with life around it. Well, the collective circuitry can also be expressed in different charts, but you always go back to what's, you know, how to operate correctly as yourself comes down to your type, your strategy, and then you can look at the elements that are unique within that. So for the generator, right up in the left-hand corner, the upper left-hand corner, it's again a sharing. So she shares what she sees. Sees comes from the visual, and understands when invited. She responds to share stories from her past when invited. when invited is kind of what goes on when a person signs up for your class. They're inviting you to share. So we've got a manifester, Frida again. And in this case, she influences others with impact by sharing the details she sees in the patterns as it leads to improvements and a change in the future. Just all kinds of things. Oops, I just noticed Cecilia's been waiting. I'm sorry, Cecilia, I just now looked up and saw you'd been waiting, so welcome to you. We're right in the middle of talking about the collective circuitry. We're keynoting that, so you've got a little bit you'll want to catch up on when you listen to the download. So another chart, the one on the lower left-hand side, is a projector chart. This is another past student, the same one. She waits for the recognition, because that's what a projector's strategy is to wait for an invitation, but also a recognition of what she has witnessed before sharing with others. That would fit. And that comes from basically the channel that went from the throat to the G center in that case. And then we have the reflector chart. It's going to have potential gates that are falling within circuitry that's collective. So he fuels the desire to share experiences and feelings and waits for 28 days to decide what to do with it. With the correct others, who will bring their potential feelings and possibility of greater clarity and experience through crisis, he can express progress that can be shared with humanity. So it's so interesting. You could, again, not know this person and yet have all of these ways to express certain aspects of the mechanics coming from the chart. Maybe it's right on the money and the person would recognize it. Maybe it hadn't happened in their life yet, but it's always there as a potential because it's all there within the mechanic. So we have another circuit, tribal, support. And so this one's an interesting one. If you're trying to kind of remember what the pattern of tribe is, you know, within the body graph, I guess you have to associate it with something that you can remember. I look at it and I think of a tribe as a team, as a unit, a group that kind of comes together. And notice what is not included. There's only 6 out of 9 centers that are really actively engaged in expressing aspects of the tribe. So what's excluded from tribal? What's absolutely not a part of that energies? Yeah, the G is one. You bet. It's the head, the Ajna, and the G. It's sort of interesting to look at what it's not part, because what you start to see is that the tribe has really got no concern for direction in life or identity, a unique role within the totality that an individual or the collective might have. And it's not mental. It's not about what you think. It's not philosophical. It doesn't have, you know, all kinds of philosophies or consciousness. It's not an awareness. It's not aware at all or conscious of anything in that kind of mental way. It's not there offering each other outer authority awareness. It's the tribe. The tribe is another emotional manifesting generator, though, kind of waiting for life to bring things it can respond to. But then once it's there, it has to wait for clarity to decide. In this case, with the ego involved, the ego is really the heart and soul of survival through resources on the mundane material world. So it's going to take a while. It's going to take clarity to decide what resources are needed to support and also bargain with others. You know, how do you go out in the world and maintain, your access to all the resources you need. Well, you're going to have to engage with perhaps others that have the resources you don't. You want to get the best deal for that. You want to have a bargain for that. You want to bring out the best value for yourself in that. And this is really centered not on the throat. The heart and soul, the center of this, of the tribe is the ego. That's really, a way to remember that. I've thought of it as, well, if you look at the pattern, it's kind of like the sport baseball, sort of. The baseball that's got it's got these 4 bases, and I don't know why the 45 is sort of just sticking out there, kind of the one that's sort of back in the background. The voice, and right at home plate, you could say. Maybe it's the catcher. But you've got the pitcher on the mound right in the middle. So that might be how you remember it. There's all kinds of ways to remember it, but it is a unique circuitry, and it's really on its own, and it's just about the team. It's not about someone being uniquely contributing something different. You got to be, if you're going to be on the team, you got to be on the team. No, no need to be a star. It's the team that's the star, not the individual that's the star here. So when we look at words to kind of exemplify this circuitry, support is right up there at the top. No formats. There's no channel. I'll go back one slide so you to really see it. See all of these format channels. Sorry, this thing keeps popping in on you. But the format channels going from the root center to the sacral are open. There is no formatted frequency that is bringing progress here. There's no pressure, no fuel to change things. Oh my goodness, I have to share with you, because of my collective circuitry, I just saw a spouting of a whale just out my window. And there it goes again. Woohoo, how exciting. That's not something you see every day. So that was distracting. Sorry about that. And so we have no formats. That says that time is sort of timeless. And that's what happens with the tribe. It's a timeless tradition that kind of goes into it all. And so we have a sense that is very, very tactical. Touch, smell. It's why there's so many rituals when it comes to tribal things. And tribal things can be anywhere from family to business to community to, a club, to a team, to a, oh gosh, anything that makes you identify with a group. And when you consider this, there is a sense of touch and smell, and it's like what do you do when you finish a deal in business? You shake on it. When you shake on it, it seals the deal. It seals the bargain. It says, we're now committed to it. You better not break your promise. We shook on it. So this kind of stuff is going on. That's why, there's the hugging. You don't just, I had a conversation with my nephew at one of the holidays, and he was talking about confusing mixed signals that sometimes people give each other in a business environment. He was talking, we were talking about, I think it was really gender-related things, because there's so much going on with gender and people, talking about, abuse in certain industries with, taking advantage of things. And he said, but there, so many females in his industry were giving mixed signals. They would come up and meet him for the first time and give him a hug. And he's thinking, well, what's that about? This is business. You're kind of crossing the lines. Well, you're crossing the lines in business because you're trying to make it more intimate. So these kinds of factors, are some things to consider. So emotional frequency is the ratchet wave. It's not a progress forward. Go back to the list. I just saw your comment, Bamboo. Sorry for that. I don't think I got to the list yet. Oh, maybe I did. Okay, hang on. Well, I don't think I did. I didn't bring up this list yet. Or maybe I did. Let me look. That list. Is this the one? Bamboo, is that the list you were talking about for the tribe? Go ahead and put in the chat where you're at, which list. Okay, cool. So yeah, this ratchet wave is one that is not like the collective that's bringing progress on an ongoing basis. It's always kind of moving forward, even though it's kind of having its ups and downs. The tribe's wave doesn't really operate with forward progress all the time. It's kind of got to bring the whole tribe along with it. And so it's sort of like the support element where you're making progress, but you've also got to take, maybe 2 steps forward, but 1 step back. There's always that give and take in there. You're trying to bring the whole thing together, but bring everybody together. Not everybody has the same strengths. And there's a building up of tension within that progress that it sometimes just sort of breaks free and releases. That's where tempers can kind of flare up at times. You release all that pent up emotional, to some degree it builds into maybe some anger at times. And then you've got it out of your system. That ratchet wave is there. So the tribe is here to ensure value is established and to keep commitments to support the needs for the material survival of a group, whether the group represents a business, family, tribe, community, neighborhood, country, sports team, industry, all these things that you can identify with as a group. That's why, I mentioned a team, because teams have the same uniform. That's how you can say they're on what team. You're not looking for the individual in that moment. You're looking for who's on what team. And that's the identity. It's the group's identity that matters. So this is, as you step back and consider the benefit that we have as a world, this is kind of the bedrock of the foundation of how life is structured and maintained. So that there is this balance between things that are always changing, things that are always, the potential for the new, and a foundational support that keeps things the same at the same time. The tribe does that, so that there's still a place that's steady and strong and committed and there to fall back on. So anytime the collective establishes something that was proven to be good and came from the individual as new, the tribe will, at some point want to keep and make more of and sell things by bargaining, and then it becomes this, really not just a part of a pattern, but locked into the foundation of life. So it represents kind of our human life process on this mundane. And I say mundane because if you're looking at it at just the most basic mundane kind of level, then you get right down into the core, basic mundane needs, things like reproduction, communal protection, nourishing of the offspring, I should say, shelter, food, education. You might not have thought of education as a basic need, but in this day and age, it is. If you don't have any education, your tribe is just not going to be able to compete in this world. Not at this time, not in this place of history. And so this is, you know, again, now become a basic need. So the source of anything that is very bargain-based but materially based is also kind of in the realm of this. Things like blood inheritance, you know, you have resources passed down on in families generation after generation, and it's along bloodlines. It's not along, you know, who earned it. It's, you know, kind of you were born into it, that type of stuff. So there's also this genetic tradition that everybody must be the same. You know, you dress the same, you kind of eat the same, you probably smell the same. And you've got the tribe that is making more children and marketable products that's supporting itself tribally. In fact, if you go back in history, you know, business started first from families. You know, you had a family farm, you had a family store that everybody in the family worked at, and that was kind of what you did in the community. So again, all of these things are making more in a form of support. And to make more, you try to get the best bargain, you try to make it fair for all, and you know, if not, you don't survive. So the focus here is family and immediate community, but also having to follow the rules. Makes sense? So that's the tribe. And when you can look at anyone, I had to change my generator chart because I actually don't have any tribal circuitry. I have tribal potentials. I've got gates, but not life forces. So there's a generator chart, and obviously this is a chart that responds to supporting others without knowing why. Why do I say that? Because obviously that's got an unconscious nature to it. In time with clarity, he can supply the energy for work that supports the material resources needed to sustain business and family. Here's a different projector chart I'm putting in too. And this happens to be someone who grew up in the public eye within the Hollywood industry. Her name actually is Jodie Foster, if you've ever heard that name. And she was an actress at early age, but she then has gone on to become a director. So still very much supporting the community. So when she waits to be invited to be a part of a community over time, she can unconsciously deliver the support her community needs emotionally through her own willpower and commitment to providing value. Those are just words that are fitting into little places within a sentence that is, you know, offering an expression of her formula that can be mixed and matched and still be true. A reflector, if she waits or he waits 28 days, they can unconsciously support survival on the mundane material world by being in control of the tribal resources. There happens to be the gate 21. It's unconscious, but it's in the ego, and that's the gate of, you know, gate of control, controlling of the resources of the tribe. So I'm going to offer some circuitry homework here. And since we are, you know, pretty much moving along at a good rate today, I'm going to also go into the integration channel descriptions. So first, the tribal homework. So here we have an offer for you to list your defined channels, again, by the channel name. It's really good exercise and practice to get into the names themselves. We often use kind of a shortcut and name the numbers of a channel. because it's easier for a person to find on the body graph their number. You're looking for a number inside of a center, but the names of the channels themselves are really keynotes for what that expression of potential is within the whole body graph, how it engages and interacts with everything. So that's why it's good practice to start trying to also identify it by name. And so you can just write the name next to it, and then just simply write if it's bringing an expression or a potential expression of empowerment, self-empowerment, if it's part of integration, sharing or support, just at the biggest of broadest levels for you, just to recognize what you've got there. And are there any circuit groups you don't have? That's how I found I don't have tribal, because I never wrote tribal next to my channels. So here's an example of mine, just very simply. You could see all of a sudden, wow, that's sort of interesting. My mind is collective, but my response is mutative. My response is individual. It's like, well, no wonder sometimes my life can be hard, because what I respond to isn't what my mind necessarily wants to accept, or my mind wants to, really go through, because it's like, I want to keep things the same, only better, and you keep changing things, sacral. And then if you want to also go a little further, use the blank body graph and literally color in all the areas that are normally open or white in your chart. Now that can even mean that within a defined center, you've got certain gates that are normally white, normally not activated. And just look and see and consider how these open, whether you now see a pattern that's a different circuitry or channel themes, how they may be conditioning you in your life, if that's something you're not normally naturally relating to. And then this was what happened with me when I looked at my chart too. There's internal challenges sometimes that arise when I have competing themes. My individual channel bringing change, my collective channels sharing things that are already there in the pattern. None of those are personal though. So that's kind of a conflict when I get into conditioning with tribal channels, because the tribal channels always come from the outside for me. Those are things that I'm always conditioned by, and they can be quite personal. And again, that's not consistently reliable for me to be doing things that people would take personally. It's not intended to be personal. This was really an eye-opener. It looks like I have, a fair bit of definition in my chart until I put all the things I'm not in there. These are all the places I can be pulled into conditioning. It's like, oh my gosh, how did I even get up this morning to deal with all that? So it's kind of an interesting exercise. It's what allowed me to see how much the tribal qualities of life, family, for example, family was a big, big area of my conditioning. The family obligations, the guilt if I didn't attend a family event, those are because you get caught in between the expectations of the tribe, the family itself, and I have family members that are very tribal, and they're going to take it personal if I don't go to their dinner, those kinds of things. And you do want to, and I'm designed to be able to learn a lot about the tribe. So it's not just about avoiding conditioning, it's about recognizing I'm kind of going to the tribal school in this, time in my life, really learning deeply about tribal things. And, I could say that that has been true for me. So when we get to circuitry, we're going to now go into an area that doesn't quite fit when you look at all the life forces represented in the major circuit, and that's those things left are called the integration channel. channels or channel. It depends on what's activated. If it's all activated, and it's really an expression of one channel. But if just aspects of that, those gates are activated, then they're individual integration channels. So there's no minor circuit, but it turns the way the frequency of the energy works. It's not so much about being a presence within humanity that is focused in how it engages and interacts with others. It's almost as somewhat of a turning inward kind of circuitry, or not circuitry, but channel, life force channels. It's kind of empowering. It's self-absorbed. It's not looking for how to move forward through the movement in the body graph. It's sort of there, kind of integrating itself. So we're going to take a look at that. So yeah, that's why it comes out with the word self-empowered, but it does fall, and this is where you get the word integration. It does integrate with other circuitry. In other words, it shares some of the quality characteristics and frequencies that go along with a circuit, but it's still not moving itself forward. It's not there for empowerment of itself and others. It's there really for its own focal point, its own in the moment kind of thing. So it's an integration field, you could call it. And it's so different than circuits, because circuits show the movement step by step through its circuitry. It brings movement through its circuitry. This doesn't. So for example, all circuits, major circuits, each of the life forces that bring the movement are only two gates. And they're gates that bring an expression of the two centers that is moving the energy through those hubs of energy. But when you get into integration, what's interesting is this makes up an expression of life force that could bring about 4 gates at once, that includes 4 centers. It's so much more integrated and complicated. Do you see the difference? So all the others were bringing out a channel that went, from A to B, and this is not going anywhere. It's sort of an expression of biological functions that's right there and completely self-absorbed. So it's the only one, that is kind of act this way. And so it's sort of a seamless, I'm going to try to say the word again, seamlessly activated whole. That's why we say it's also considered a single channel. It's a channel that expresses all 4 of these biological functions at the same time, if it's all activated. So the flow is really not trying to get to the throat. I see there's a question. I know, me too, Bamboo. I saw that picture, and I always think of that as the backbone of humanity. And in fact, I'll tell you a little secret, that is where it all began. This really was, kind of the time in our history that allowed us as humans to stand up erect and, be not a mammal anymore, but a human. This is, this is pretty primitive stuff here. It's sort of the backbone of where we came from. And yet it's obviously self-interested, because it's looking at what? Well, look at what it expresses. It expresses these 4 centers as one complete expression. That's so different than, a life force being a part of a process. And so, yeah, you've got the connection of 4 gates, but look at how many possible life forces come out of 4 gates. Can you count them? How many channels can you create here out of these 4 gates? 6, exactly. So everything else, you'd have 2 gates and you'd have 1 channel. You'd always have 2 centers. But here we have 4 gates, 4 centers, but 6 potential different expressions of life force. Now, 2 of them don't belong to integration. Which 2 channels don't actually, well, I'll give you a little bit more hint when we get to the channels. I'll hold back for a second. So yes, integration does offer, with 4 centers and 4 gates, the possibility of 6 defined channels. 2 of them belong to different circuits. One is the centering circuit and the other is the knowing circuit. And again, each of the gates in the circuit potentially quantums with 3 other gates in the circuit. It's so different than the others. What is its type? We did this for the circuits. Well, let's do it for this. You can see how different it is. It's not there serving the whole of the body graph as humanity. What is it really doing if you look at it just as a type? But it's very different kind of manifesting generator. Thank you, Pam. It's a splenic manifesting generator. Well, it's splenic in that it's expressing, it is sacral authority, but if we were to name it as a kind of manifesting generator, the sacral response is basically expressing splenic awareness. Again, it's both. It is sacrally. The generator part is the sacral part, but it's awareness, and that's probably a better way to phrase it. The emotional generators we were looking at before. I'm going to move this out of the way in case it's in your line of sight. The manifesting generator before, the awareness was coming through an emotionality that had to be processed over time. This is coming from the now. This is an awareness that is immediate, responsive, reactive, but it's reacting not for the tribe. It's not looking at anything tribal. It's not looking at anything emotional. It's not awareness that has feelings. It's not a pressure that to move forward or a pressure to conceptualize or to think at all. It is a body reaction immediately to what's happening. And what does that allow it to do? To survive and to have its place in the totality, because it's aligned perfectly with survival and exactly the right behaviors that get expressed right immediately in the now through its sacral response. It's just not worried about anybody else. It's not a relational kind of quality at all. It's a reptilian kind of not calculating, but just reacting to its own survival. You know, that's really kind of what's being represented here. So it is very complex. It is really showing you in the moment, this is someone that has to be waiting for life to bring things that it will spontaneously and intuitively respond to in the moment. And that's how it maintains its survival ability, its well-being, its safety, its security. Do you go back and think about that historical time when man was, you know, sort of the mammal, not probably doing very well in the course of the dinosaurs all around it, or the tigers or bears or whatever, you know, it was not as well equipped to fight against. And yet it kind of figured out how to, through mutation, of course, to really kind of take care of itself with what it had, to react with what it could, and to survive in the now through kind of the behaviors that were quickly responding and reacting to what was appropriate through its awareness. So yes, it's a splenic manifesting generator, and it focuses on an internally self-focused way to survive in the now. And that's, that's quite different. That's quite different. So that's why when you look at this particular combination of life forces, that's why it's really focused on self-empowerment. Now, it still shares the frequency of patterns of energy moving through individual circuitry. That's why the format is still there. It's picking up the pulse of mutation. It's bringing about the potential for mutation. Again, there was lots of mutations that led it to, what humanity to survive in the now could do. And that's probably how we got where we are today. It's very much about the now. It's also aligned with acoustics, but its type to operate correctly as itself, to allow its own survival, was pretty much, just being in the moment, being very spontaneous. So this kind of quality of combinations of life forces offers, this splenic awareness. This is where our fight or flight kind of survival mechanism came from. This is a physical survival in the now. This goes back, again, 4.2 million years. It kind of reflects our design as a very, very early ancestral mammal, and all the evolution moment to moment to moment to moment that led us to today. So this, you could also say, is about self-care, individual survival, self-love. All of those are present within these interesting channels, and these are the channel names. So this is how you can also see what's missing here, what comes from individual circuitry. The 3420 is here, and the 3420 is the channel of charisma. So it goes, let's see if I can get I don't know what's going to end up. I'll try the spotlight. So here we have the sacral. The 34 can also go to the 20. So that's going to be the channel of charisma. It's an interesting phrase, though, because there's no thoughts here. The Ajna Center is not defined. It says a design where thoughts must become deeds. But when you actually look at different versions, different books, I'm going to just get rid of that. If you look at different books, you're going to see it phrased slightly different. You'll just do your own research and find that out. But what the original, kind of the white book, talked about was a design where awareness must become deeds. And of course, where we know the awareness comes from in this area is really an awareness in the now that comes from splenic awareness, not the mind. It's body awareness. It's all about the body's awareness. And when a person has this channel, we know they're very busy with what their available life force has responded to. And it's self-absorbed in that. These are the kind of people that you just feel like they're always busy in their own busyness, and you're always feeling like you're interrupting them. There's no place to integrate with being included in it. Like the other circuitry all feels like there's an interaction there. This one feels like you're kind of butting into their own self-absorption. It's like, hey, do you want to do this? Well, I'm kind of busy right now. That kind of quality is going on. Now, you can also have the 34 power, the sacral power, go to the 57. That's the channel of power. And it says a design of an archetype. Well, we now know what kind of archetype it is. It's just human. It's a human archetype. It's intuitive response in the now, human, that is in power through its and empowering, self-empowering its own intuition to survive based on, yeah, wanting to make sure you're around tomorrow. Now we can also have the 57 offer an awareness that has nothing to do with it's just response, but the perfected form is aligning intuition with your own behavior of self in the now. It's why there is a perfected form, a perfection of survival, you could say. But I've noticed people with this channel, they're also very much about wanting to perfect, you know, and always perfect and make better the form of something, the beauty of something. It's funny to watch it in action, but it's also about behavior and everybody having the correct behavior. You know, really noticing when people are not behaving correctly and focusing on that. We've got the 20 going to the 10. It's another integration life force. It's called the channel of awakening. You now know it's a projector channel. It says something about becoming awake. It's something that has to come through the invitation. It has to be through an invitation and your expression of who you are. Suddenly a resignation or a recognition is a better term. A recognition in what you said that you're aligned with self, and that is what it is to be awake. To be consciously expressing your true self-love and nature. So these are all, you know, again, it's a design of commitment to higher principles. So it stands alone on its own. It's not a circuit. It's not part of how we engage with life around us. It's really kind of there as an essential infrastructure in the body graph. So you have a lot of components. It's still somewhat unique. And, you know, I have people in my family, my niece in particular, was my mom, not my mom. My mom didn't have integration. My sister had integration. She has the 5734, and her daughter has integration. And then she was, you know, kind of struggling in her life in terms of relationships, and she met a guy who also was almost all integration, and the two of them really shared such the same perspective about life. They're both independent, but they still came together with an understanding of that. And then they had a little child who is the cutest little projector who happens to be integration. She's got perfected form. And so it's quite an interesting family to watch them all be their integration selves. So that's pretty much the integration channels. It's all about respondability with the sacral to circumstances in the now. That's the splenic awareness, and you know that's what it's all about. So when the 20 and the 57 is entered into it, that's individual knowing. And when 10 and 34 is there, that's centering. Those are not part of integration. Those are a part of the energy that flows through integration. So, yeah, the 3410 we'll get to next class, Pam, because I'm going to now look at the major circuits, including individual, and we're going to look at the channels with that. I just had a little extra time today, so I started us off with the integration channels, okay? So that's what we'll do in our next class, is we'll look at the specifics within a circuit, and the specifics being what are the channels making up that circuit. So that's how we'll get to see the knowing circuit and the minor circuit, which is called centering circuit, and individuality. And I'll show you the component life forces that come from that. Okay, any comments or questions though as we wrap up today? This is one of those rare moments where I really stayed on track, on time, and yeah, so we're right on time today. Any comments, any questions? You can find the correct names in, I believe, the student manual. I believe all the channel names are talked about within the circuit. And I would also suggest that if you have the definitive book of human design, which is in many different languages, you also have access to it because all the channels are listed there too. So it should be within your student materials. Again, if you don't have access to them in your native tongue, they are in English, and those can be obtained through Human Design America. So you should be referring to your student manual for that part. Okay? Any other questions, though? Okay, well then I look forward to us continuing our look at circuitry next in our next class. And I guess that's going to be today. This is the time of the semester where everything is sort of running into each other in my mind. So I have to look at my calendar. Today is Wednesday, so it'll be next Monday that we get together. And that's where we'll take a look at the specific circuits. Well, thank you. I enjoyed all of you being here and engaging with me today. That was nice. See you soon. Have a good weekend. Bye for now.